I know I just woke up, but um, I want to talk about photons and the inverse square law of light. So basically, they say that photons, this is the heliocentric claim, this is the mainstream science claim. Photons travel forever, okay? They're saying, the cosmic microwave background, they say that they can read photons from 13 billion years ago that haven't hit anything. They're saying the photons come in, and once it hits your eye or hits a physical surface, then it's done. That's why they can't measure a photon. They can't capture it. They can't show you a photon. They can't bring you a photon, because then it would hit them and it would be gone. So now the inverse square law of light is when as you double the distance, you see 25% of the light intensity. So, but what they're saying is the photons are spreading out. So each individual photon is just as powerful as it always has been. So each individual photon never loses its power. So if there's billions of photons, each of those billion photons are just as powerful as they were when they were created. But what happens is, over distance, they're spreading out. And because they're spreading out, you're getting basically there's less density of photons, which makes you not be able to see the light as bright or the light intensity. So basically, my question is, let's say that now we have Polaris 430 light years away. If Polaris is 430 light years away and those photons are spreading out, and as you double the distance, they become a quarter of the intensity because they're all spread out. That's 430 light years away. Eventually, once the photons from a light that far away reach the observer, what are you getting? One photon? And that I get it that they say that like each photon holds essentially the entire image in it. But how does that work in their model where you're looking? When I take a telescope or a zoom camera, a high-powered zoom camera, and I zoom into Polaris, I'm zooming in and I can see it, and I'm looking at it, and I can zoom in. So as I zoom in, how can I get a clear image of it if I'm literally I'm zooming into those photons? Is that what's happening? How am I zooming into photons that haven't hit anything yet? So if it hasn't hit my eye, right? It hasn't hit my eye yet. How can I see it? So how can I zoom into it if those photons haven't made it to me yet? That's my question. And just to explain what I'm talking about, I asked the Google AI, maybe they can give me a quick answer. Can I zoom into a photon? No, you cannot zoom into a photon in the traditional visual sense, because a photon is a fundamental elementary particle with zero physical size and no internal structure to look inside of. You cannot zoom into a photon, no internal structure. Protons and neutrons are made of smaller quarks, but a photon is a point-like particle that cannot be broken down further. So, to see or zoom into something, you must bounce light, photons, off of it. You cannot use a photon to reflect off another single photon to form a traditional image. So, with that said, how can I zoom into stars? How can I zoom into the sun that's supposedly the sun from 8 minutes ago? How am I zooming into that? If light works the way they have claimed it works, where it's essentially just flying around and when it hits your eye, you can see it. Like basically they're saying that the Polaris is, we're looking at Polaris as it was 430 years ago. But when you zoom in, how am I zooming into? I mean, I'm zooming in, I'm just looking at it. And if the photons are so spread apart that by the time they make it to me, I'm only getting a few of them, what happens if they miss? How can I get a continuous shot of it? How come it's not disappearing sometimes if once in a while I'm in an area where the photons don't hit? Don't they have to hit me? You know, like how am I being continuously, constantly hit by a photon in my eye or in the camera lens, but I'm zooming into it? You shouldn't be able to zoom in if this is how it works, because zooming in means you're magnifying what you're looking at and getting a better, more detailed view of it. So how am I getting a better, more detailed view of something? If I see something in reality, for me to get a better view of it, I have to move closer to it physically. As I move closer to it, I'm seeing it better. But somehow they're saying that these photons are flying around and we can just zoom in. And they're saying like they have telescopes that zoom into outer space. So if you're zooming into outer space, how are you capturing anything? Like it would be a big mess. How are the photons not crossing paths? You know, I should be looking at Polaris and zooming in, and all of a sudden I see Betelgeuse. And I'm like, how did Betelgeuse get over here? Because the photons are flying around everywhere. How are they staying in their little box of space? How can I see them in their exact position? Exactly where they're supposed to be, if there's all these photons flying around outward, spherically, in all directions. They're not crossing paths. I mean, this whole thing is just dumb. It's essentially just, if you just use your brain, it's like that. None of that even makes sense. But hey, if I'm wrong, prove me wrong. I'd love to understand how the heck does that even work. I mean, I know that stars are just essentially, you are the universe, so you're seeing yourself from the inside. I am the vortex. That's why in phi, the phi cycle, phi is an eye in the middle with a circle around it to represent the torus field. I in the middle, I is the vortex. I am the vortex. We are torus fields. So we're essentially sharing this user interface, which is reality, and we're all fields. We're all our own fields, and we're interacting with each other, and it's essentially like we're all in the same video game. We all see our own TV screen, but we're all playing the same game because we all have the same user interface, which is the universe. But we are all in our own personal reality. You know, and then that makes me think about dreams. And in dreams, I see lights and I can touch things and feel things in my dream. Does that mean there's photons in my dream? No, there's not photons in my dream. Everything is all of the mind. So I'm always interested in learning more. You know, you can sit here and be like, you're so dumb. How could you say that? Blah, 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 blah. But then I'll just block you because obviously you're ignorant. You know, nobody knows everything, okay? I just find interest in this particular subject, and I like things to make sense to me. Hello? So, Dusty Truth signing out. Peace.